Last year, I was with a buddy of mine and we were going to the Hart Creek Scramble in Alberta. But my friend has health problems, so instead of the hard trails, we did the easy one. Now we're both climbers and have been to Hart Creek for rock climbing in the past and had a great time, so it wasn't a surprise to see the sporadic climbers on the mountains. Hart Creek is also pretty popular and easy for people who just want to go for a nice nature walk or maybe have a picnic. Anyways, so we walked in, enjoying the day watching climbers on our way by. We saw a couple even doing multi-pitch climbing, which means basically leapfrogging up the route. We settled in for lunch about a half hour later and left a couple hours after that. On our way back, I remember seeing a climbing shoe in the creek and thinking, oh, someone must have lost this. I picked it up when my buddy got my attention and I looked further downstream. Both climbers, a young man and his partner, were both lying in the creek bed, rope and harness still attached. It was very surreal. We had seen these people climbing not 2 hours before, making their calls, having a good time. The first reaction I had was that I remembered that there was a family right behind us, a husband and a wife with a young daughter, who were playing in the creek on the way down. So we ran back to go stop the family as quietly as we could, just to let them know what was happening. So they started to walk up, and it turned out that the husband was an off-duty police officer, so he took control of the situation. I learned later that we weren't the first ones on the scene and that the authorities had been called. Needless to say, that was a very quiet ride back into town that day. Over the years when I've told this story, many people haven't believed me, but it's true, I swear. My brother and I were hiking out in our new backwoods. We had just moved to a new house, and we stumbled upon a small open field. In the center of it, there was a person with a blue jacket crouched over. We thought it was a new friend of ours that we just met, so I ran out to meet him. I did not have my glasses on at the time, but I got pretty close enough to see that it was a grown man leaned over a carcass of a deer, stabbing it and eating it with an unsharpened stick. He looked up and saw me. I was pretty freaked out, so I turned around and yelled at my brother to run. And so we started to sprint as fast as we could back home. We saw the man behind us with blood all around his mouth, and he was smiling. When we got home, we told our parents, and they called the cops. They searched the area but never found the guy. After that, we barely went outside in fear of the guy and what he would do to us if he caught us. This past winter, I hiked one of the high peaks in the ADKs with a buddy of mine, and we camped out every night. Everything was fine the entire first day. We had a great night's sleep, and we woke up early to hike back to the parking area. On the way back down the trail, my friend and I noticed that someone else had been hiking as well. About a mile after walking, I stopped and I saw that my full name, first name, and last were drawn into the snow on the side of the footpath. But I didn't do it. Neither did my friend. It was snowing a bit throughout the night, and if it was drawn the day before, the snow would have covered it up. We got a bit freaked out, and we decided to hustle back to our car so we could get the hell out of there. We finally get back to the parking area, and I go to sign myself out of the registry book. When I turn the page where I signed in, I see that someone had scribbled out all of my information to where you couldn't read it anymore. No one else has signed into the book besides myself for 3 days. I guess I won't be going back there anytime soon. One day, I went camping in the back country of Quebec with a few of my friends, and we were pretty much all alone for what we thought. While laying in our sleeping bags, we heard shuffling outside of the tent one night. but wrote it off as a raccoon or a possum. We woke up in the morning with scattered cigarette butts all around the front of our tents, as if someone stood there all night keeping an eye on us. Nothing happened after that except for some thunderstorms and bear sightings, but seeing those cigarette butts definitely freaked us out. First day of school when I was 13, I had to be dropped off by my mom at around 7 a.m. and not walk with my friends because my mom works early every Monday and Tuesday. None of my friends were even awake at 7, let alone would be at school. I tried to make light of the situation though. I was basically here alone, so I thought I would walk around and see where everything is, and possibly learn the building a little bit. There were a few teachers walking around, but it was pretty empty. I wandered over to the girls' changing room. Nothing special at first glance. I took a lap around the changing room and noticed one of the lockers were open. There was something inside. It was a note. I still remember what it said. It said, "If you think about leaving, I will make your worthless life a living hell." It didn't say who it was from or who it was intended for. I was thinking about what I should do next when a teacher who I'll call Mr. Sanders walked in. He asked me what I was doing here, and he said it in a firm tone. But it's funny he asked me this with such suspicion when he was in a girl's changing room this early, when students aren't even here yet. I told him I wasn't doing anything and that it's my first day here. I also told him about the note I just found, and I gave it to him. He looked at the note and didn't say anything. He then said, "Thanks for reporting it. I'll look into it." Then he told me to leave, once again in a harsh, demanding tone. The only thing I heard after leaving the locker room was a locker slam shut. I assumed Mr. Sanders just closed it. As time went on, I heard a lot of rumors about Mr. Sanders, like he's a perv and he cheats on his wife, stuff like that. Next year around February, a girl who was 3 years older than me, called Lizzie, left our school. When she left, it was more like sudden and unexpected, and more of no one really knows why she left. And around the same time, Mr. Sanders left. I can't be sure, but honestly, I think the rumors involving Mr. Sanders were true. And that note, the one that I found in the locker, was from him intended for Lizzie. I think on that day, no one knows exactly what went on with both of them, but I have a pretty good idea of what happened. This happened to my son Sam when he was 5 years old on his first day of school. After dropping Sam off, I seen him walk towards one of his teachers. I got back in my car and I drove off. What usually happens is I always drive around the school to wave at Sam before he goes inside. This time, however, Sam wasn't waving at me. Instead, he was walking to a man who wasn't familiar looking. At first, I thought it might have been another one of his teachers. That was until I saw the man grab Sam's hand and forcefully walk him into another direction. I drove as fast as I could around the school towards where the man was pulling Sam, which was the parking lot. Once I drove around, I could see the man pushing Sam into his car. And at that moment, a sickening feeling ran through me, and the feeling that I could possibly lose my son. I drove up to the man's car and stopped right behind him so we couldn't reverse. I was screaming for him to let my son go, and also try to get attention of nearby pedestrians. The man refused to let Sam go. Even though my car was blocking his path, he still tried to reverse and force his way through. Thankfully, he gave up and let Sam out the car. At that point, there were a few more parents there to subdue the man, so he couldn't get away. Sam was unharmed. In the school, myself and other parents were much more cautious about dropping their children off at the school. The man was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping and reckless endangerment of a child. It makes me feel sick thinking, what might have happened if I never looked twice to wave at my son, and he was taken from me? And what's more disturbing is that the man was actually a father to a little girl who was the same age as my son. This story happened to me a long time ago when I was 5, and it took place on my first day of school. The first day was introduction day, more like a morning where the parents would come in with their kids and talk with the teachers and that kind of thing. I remember my teacher talking with my mom, and I wandered off slightly down the hall just to look at some drawings that were pinned up. As I was looking at the drawings, I heard,
"Hey, they're pretty, aren't they?"
I turned around and saw a middle-aged man in blue overalls, holding a mop while grinning at me. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He then crouched down and said,
"They're pretty just like you."
As he said this, he brushed my hair behind my ear with his long, dirty nails, still grinning at me while showing his yellow teeth.
"Would you like to come with me to do some drawing?"
He suddenly dropped his mop and grabbed my arm tight and started pulling me with him. At that point, I heard my mom calling my name, and as soon as the man heard her, he let go of my arm. I ran to my mom and gave her a hug. The rest of the morning was fine. I didn't mention what just happened to my mom. I think at the time I was too young to understand the danger of what just happened. I only attended the school for about 3 weeks before changing schools. I never really knew why we moved. My mom always told me it was to move to a better school, but it was only recently I found out the real reason. My mom had told me that the janitor that worked at the school was arrested for kidnapping and other things with a child, which was a few weeks after I started. I looked it up on the internet and I saw it to be the same man who pulled my arm and tried to get me to go with him. It makes me sick thinking about what could have happened if my mom didn't call out, or the man never let me go. This story happened to me on my first day of high school. I remember walking down my street in the morning toward the bus stop. There were a few other kids that stood next to me talking. There was also a man who definitely didn't belong at a high school bus stop. He was tall and a white tank top on. I thought he looked weird and out of place, but I really didn't give it a second thought. My first day of high school actually went fine. It was on the way home where it all went wrong. I got on the school bus, and as I was walking to find my seat, I saw the same man from this morning sat on the back of the bus. This time he was staring right at me. I didn't know then, and I still don't know now, how this guy even got on the bus in the first place. The house I lived in was one of the last stops, so by the time my stop arrived, most of the kids have gotten off the bus, and the bus was empty. I could just feel that guy staring at me the whole bus ride home, though I didn't dare to look behind me and check. When my stop finally arrived, I got off and I started walking. And of course that creepy man got off and started following me. I started walking faster, and as I did, the man got faster, and that continued right down my street. The faster I walked, the faster he would. It got to the point where I needed to start running. Thankfully, my house was close by. I ran by my house and slammed the door shut, and I looked through the kitchen window to see if the man was still chasing me. He was walking past my house like nothing ever happened, while staring at me. Later that night, I was upstairs in my bedroom when someone knocked at the door, the downstairs door. The next thing I heard was my mom calling me downstairs. When I get there, my mom is looking confused and checking around outside. I say to her, "Yeah, Mom?" She said, "That's weird. There was a man just here asking to speak to you." I asked what he looked like, and she described the same man who chased me home earlier that day. I told my mom about what happened and how I was pretty sure it was the same guy who knocked at the door. My mother told the police and our school. And actually, This wasn't the first time they have heard reports of this. The school and the police said they had several reports of the man stalking their children. From what I know, he was never caught. Who knows what he could be doing right now? Just be careful. The first time I moved away from home, I lived in an old cabin in the woods that I rented for really cheap. I'd never had a good night's sleep there. I always tossed and turned and woke up several times during the night. But it wasn't until after a few weeks that things got really weird. In the beginning, it were just small things that I really didn't think about too much, like keys missing and cups and plates not being where I left them. Then I started waking up in the morning to find various drawers open and things laying out around like someone had been in a hurry searching for something. I even came home to a wide open main door and decided to change the locks. But even then, when I was home, with the door locked, I could walk past and just in the corner of my eye, see the door slide open. One time, I was cat sitting one of my friend's cats, and it would just sit for hours in the middle of the room and toss its tail from side to side and watch as if it was following something around the room with his eyes. It creeped me out. If you can only imagine what it felt like to see this cat slowly following something that floats randomly around the room and finally stop right beside you, imagine how that would feel. After a while, I just could not live there anymore and finally moved out. This story is totally true. It happened to me when I was about 4 years old. My dad used to really like going on vacation with me and my family. One time, we went to what I think was Big Bear, but I'm not sure. Anyways, we rented a cabin. I don't remember much, but I remember the inside of the cabin was beautiful. It was very roomy, and it was 2 floors and had its own den, kitchen, and bedroom. We arrived during the day, and everything seemed normal. When night came, however, we started hearing noises. It sounded like someone was shaking the front doorknob trying to get in. I was the first to notice, and I told my mom. But she didn't believe me. Then she saw it too. For a couple of minutes, the front doorknob just kept shaking by itself, and we were too afraid to go look out the door. Then we heard another noise. It sounded like steel hitting steel. Then it stopped. My dad was afraid someone was trying to break in, so we packed up all of our things so we can leave. But before we did, my dad called the police and asked them to come search the premises. We exited out the back door because the noises were coming from the front. Our car was down the hill from the back of the cabin. I fell asleep in the car and woke up the next morning in a small rinky-dink motel room that was nothing as roomy and beautiful as the cabin. I was so bummed, but I was quickly relieved we had left because later that day, we found out who was making those noises. The police had arrived there and searched the outside and found nothing. Then they went inside and found a man that had 2 hooks instead of hands. He had been twisting the doorknob with his hook. Then he clashed his hooks together, and that's what we heard was it still on steel. We found out that about 5 minutes after we left the cabin, he successfully broke in and started searching for us. The police found bodies stashed in the upstairs closet. When we were on our way home from the motel, we stopped at a gas station near the cabin where the madman had tried to break in. My mom knew it was a bad idea, but my dad told her to relax. The cops took care of that guy. He's nowhere near us. We all went into the little shop to buy some candy and snacks. We were quite surprised when we came out of the shop and headed back to our car. There was a note on the hood that read, "There's more of us. See you soon." It's safe to say that We never went back to that cabin again. My friend told me this story about him and his family going camping at these campgrounds. His brother worked there and they were really cool with the family that owned it. On the second day, as it was getting dark, my friend and his brother, who was a regular counselor there for the past few years, went for a walk which led them down the winding dirt road to another cluster of cabins. They could both tell there was something wrong, but they couldn't place it. My friend several years later told me that it felt like something looked completely ordinary, but it didn't feel like it was ordinary. His other brother would attribute to what he noticed next. The furthest cabin from the entrance had all the windows closed. Then he heard a loud thud, and then the lights in the cabin were on. Now, it wasn't uncommon for the other cabins to be rented out by hunters in the winter, so he left it alone even though he still had a strange vibe and decided not to investigate further. The next morning during breakfast, he was speaking to the camp director and casually asked him how many other cabins he was planning on renting that hunting season, and mentioned that he had noticed that another cabin was being used back towards the far side of the camp. The director had a stunned look on his face and then told him to call the police, and that they weren't renting out any of the other cabins that weekend. The police showed up, and after a 2-hour standoff in the middle of the woods, ended with a man in custody. For the past 3 weeks, there had been a dangerous man hiding out in the summer camp. My friend didn't know at the time, but later was told by his brother that they took him out and he was starving and unshaved. He had a rifle, pistol, and a shotgun, and 2 duffel bags full of valuables that had been taken during violent break-ins over the past month in the surrounding counties. Ever since then, we're more cautious about what we run into in the woods. I work in an outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Stringer in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had 1 co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with the full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in the hammock that night. I was really into the book I was reading, so I stayed up until around 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon and from the position I was in. I could see down the trail we had hiked to get up to the top. I lay there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp on. I was just frozen watching this person move closer to our camp. He arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveying our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but it may have been 10. He then turned, sat down under a tree facing our camp. After that, he put some type of electronic device over his eyes, and it had a green glow by his eyes. I think they were night vision goggles. He just sat there staring at our camp, so I closed my eyes and I left them open enough so I could see. He then started to rub his pants. I had no idea what to do, honestly. I decided to wait it out, so I just sat there, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp. This went on until about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up. He took a moment to survey my camp, and a few minutes later, he went back down the trail he came up on. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it definitely freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. I couldn't enjoy it. But anyways, I hope that never happens again. When I was just a little boy, I had an imaginary friend. Well, at least I thought he was an imaginary friend. Today, I'm not so sure. I would see him from time to time around my house. He was a man and he lurked in the shadows. He was completely black from head to toe and his skin was charred and pockmarked, like a burnt match. I couldn't make out his face or any other features. All I could see were his red eyes. He had the most terrifying red eyes I've ever seen. And even now, when I think of them, it gives me the chills. He appeared at random and without any warning. I would be playing with my toys and all of a sudden he would be there. He never made a sound. He never said a word. He never did anything except stand there staring at me and smiling. Then he would vanish as quietly as suddenly as he had come. As time went by, I got accustomed to his presence. It got to the point where he would just appear and I would just glance at him, then go back to playing with my toys. I could always feel his eyes as he was just standing ever so close and ever so far away at the same time. My family knew about him, but they never saw him themselves. My mother and father thought it was cute that I had an imaginary friend, but when I described him to them, they got a little creeped out. My sister was the only one who believed me. She's the only one who believed he was real, and she said it scared her. One time, I had just finished going to the bathroom and I started washing my hands. I was standing on a little stool so I could reach the sink. All of a sudden, I saw the man out of the corner of my eye. He was walking up the stairs. I called my sister and told her the man was here. She came running over, but just when I was about to point out the man, he walked backwards down the stairs until he was out of sight. When she left, he came creeping back up the stairs. I gave up trying to show him to people because he clearly did not want to be seen. Eventually, my parents moved out the house. I remember seeing the man with the red eyes watching us as we were moving and the van pulled away. He didn't follow us, and I didn't see him again after that. I dismissed him as a figment of my childish imagination. Years passed and I forgot about him. Then, one night, when I was 16 years old, I was walking upstairs to my bedroom. It was after midnight. As I was walking down the hallway, something emerged from one of the other bedrooms. It stepped out into the light and I realized, to my horror, that it was the man with red eyes. I stopped in my tracks and I froze. My heart was in my throat. He just stood there staring at me. The red eyes burned bright and he flashed me a malicious smile. Then, still staring at me, he slowly walked across the hallway into my bedroom. If this was a movie, perhaps I would have chased him down and forced him to tell me who or what he was. Perhaps it would have ended in me fighting to the death, but this wasn't a movie. It was real life, and I did neither of those things. I simply turned around, ran back down the stairs, and fled from my house. I sat on the curb outside, shivering and shaking until dawn arrived. I haven't seen him again since then. About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved to a house from our apartment. It was a very old building and the inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker and just a little colder than it should have been. Not long after we moved in, a friend of mine came to visit. The whole time we were sitting and talking, she seemed very uncomfortable. When I looked at her face, I noticed that something in the other room had caught her attention. Her eyes grew wide and she said, "I have to go." I asked her what was wrong, but she refused to tell me. Her odd reaction was freaking me out, so I kept after her. On her way out the door, she finally blurted out, "This house is haunted." but she wouldn't tell me what it was or what made her think so. To this day, she still refuses to tell me what she saw. About a week later, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the old lady in the bathroom was. One day, I was leaving my house for work, and I got to the car and I realized I needed to run back in the house to get something. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, this framed photo on the wall shot off the wall. It didn't fall down. It shot horizontally away from the wall, and it landed on a mosaic table with enough force to break some of the tiles off of it. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed, and that I came back in after it thought I had left for the day. After living in the house for about 6 months, I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck. There was no handle, but I was able to pry it up. The hole was just big enough to fit through, and there was a ladder going down. For some reason, I went down and I found myself in what looked like a homemade basement. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth, with no constructed walls or stone supports or anything like that. It was very dark, but I could see something over in the corner. It was a suspicious looking stone. It looked like one of those old headstones you see in cemeteries. Just then, some insects started jumping on me, so I got out of the basement as fast as I could and never went back. Now this is the part that affected me the most. It's also the reason we left the house. One night I was in bed laying on my stomach just about to fall asleep, and I heard someone walk into my room. The footsteps came from the doorway over to my bed. I didn't realize until later that the fact that I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. 2 hands, just gently laid flat on my back and kept me there. I assumed it was my son. "What are you doing?" I asked, but there was no answer. I looked up. No one was there. I got up and checked my son's bedroom, and he was in bed fast asleep. We moved out soon after that, and we never looked back. I'm 21 now, but when I was 4 years old, my sister had just turned 16. She had just gotten her license and was so excited. It was probably only September, and she got her license in July. My sister is from my dad's first marriage, and she lived with her mom and stepdad while I lived with our dad and my mom. We lived about 30 minutes apart. My dad worked late hours, and my mom frequently traveled for work, so I had to spend time a lot with my babysitter until my sister got her license. My dad finally gave her permission to pick me up after she got out of school and take me to her mom's until he got off of work. She was so excited to finally be able to use her license. I know I said I was only 4, but I remember this event so vividly. There are parts of it, understandably, that I've forgotten over the years. It took years for my sister to even ask me if I remembered it. But when I told her all the parts I remember, she filled in the rest for me. It was one of the first times my sister would get to pick me up from my babysitter, which means it would be one of the first times she'd been allowed to drive with me alone. Almost as soon as we pulled onto the main road, a white pickup truck swerved behind us. After a few turns, my sister noticed that the truck still followed her. Even when she would just switch lanes, he was right there switching behind her. My sister, being a bit of a paranoid person, tested it a little bit and switched lanes several times. She said she heard his tires squealing by his quick cuts to get behind her. She told me not to worry, and I remember being an oblivious little kid. She looked scared, but I had no concerns. The man started to get really angry. I don't remember really anything about what he looked like, but I do remember that he had this look of pure hate on his face. He wasn't angry, he was full of hate. He was honking his horn repeatedly, just laying on it, and he was very close to our car. He was swerving back and forth, trying to get our attention. He would pull up beside us occasionally and flip us off and honk. The first big event came about when he pulled up at the four-way stoplight. It's a bigger one, so there was a lot of room in the intersection. We were the first ones at the stoplight in our lane, and nobody beside us. The man used his lane to pass us, and he pulled his car in front of us, almost in the intersection. He was blocking us at this point. I so vividly remember that white pickup truck. He got out of it and started storming towards our car. He was screaming so hard I remember thinking his face almost looked purple. Neither one of us remember what he was saying, but he pulled up his shirt to reveal something that was horrifying. He had a gun. He pointed it at us, threatening us, and closing the gap between us. My sister put her hand over my body and told me to close my eyes, and floored it through the intersection. She said she was worried we were either going to hit him or get hit in the intersection, but it was a better chance than sitting there and waiting for a psycho man with a gun. He hopped back into his car and followed us. My house was closer to where we were than my sister's, so for some reason, she decided to go to my empty house. Obviously, he followed us and blocked us in the driveway. He got out and walked towards my sister's car, pulling out his gun. Once again, she had to think fast and swerve her way across our lawn back onto the road. This is before cell phones, and she had just started driving. It was still young. She had no idea what to do. He followed us back onto our neighborhood road, pulling up next to our car and hitting his truck against us, trying to make us skid or wreck. There's a small area of grass between our neighborhood road and a major busy road, and it was obvious he was trying to push our car hard enough to send us into the traffic beside us. I remember him doing that little gesture where you drag your finger along your throat, like you're slitting it, like he was going to kill us. His face was still purple. There was a gas station nearby, and my sister decided on the last thing she could think of. I remember her talking to me so seriously and sternly. She told me she needed me to be a big kid. In a second, we pulled by the door of the gas station to undo my seatbelt and jump out, run inside so fast that I shouldn't even worry about closing my door. I was to run inside and go directly to the person behind the counter and tell them to call 911 because a bad man was following us. We pulled in, and she threw the car in park and jumped out and did as I was told. She was only a few seconds behind, but she had actually stopped the car, parked it, and turned it off. She closed the door and mine for me and just ran inside with me. The man came into the parking lot behind us, and when we were inside, he went through my sister's car. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They never found him, and we never knew what provoked him or what his plan was. The only thing he took from the car was my sister's ID and the cash she had on her. I had just moved into a tiny town that was literally in the middle of nowhere and had less than 100 people in the total population. I was about 7 at the time, and I had overheard my parents talking about a dog that kept barking all night that kept them up. I wanted to help them, so I went out looking for neighbors with dogs just to ask them if they could maybe keep their dogs from barking all night. So this particular town had a bad track record of houses catching on fire. So there were a lot of old half-burned houses just sitting there. This particular incident happened with one of these ruined houses. As I'm walking, I hear someone call out to me, and I turn to see a very beautifully kept lawn in front of a nice white 2-story house. There's a nice old couple sitting in lawn chairs out in front, and the woman is calling me over. I walk over to the fence. The woman asks me what I'm doing walking around here by myself. I tell them about the dog and asks if they know about it. The woman says that it's her dog and she'll try to keep the dog down, and then offers me a full-size Snickers, and I took it. Feeling like I accomplished my goal, I went home. At that time, I really wanted to eat the Snickers, but it had melted on my walk back home, so I put it in the freezer to chill. Then my friend comes over, and we head over to her house, and I forgot about the candy. Wondering how the ruined houses fit into this? Well, when I return home from my friend's house, I tell my mom about the nice couple, and they would keep their dog quiet. I tell her where the house was, and she gets really confused. What do you mean? There isn't a house there. I would have shown the candy bar as evidence, but I had totally forgot about it. After some back and forth, we agree to go on a walk tomorrow in the daytime, so I can show her which house I mean. Next day, we walked down to where the house was, and there was no house. The well-kept lawn was just overgrown weeds, and the house was just nothing but a pile of rubble. Only the fence still remained. I ran home to show her the candy that I had just remembered about, and that was gone too. I still get chills when I pass by that vacant lot to this day, and right now, I'm 20 years old. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times. It would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night, I almost fell asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch, and was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified to form the words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that I was just dreaming and to go to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "See, there's nothing there." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with that knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming, and she freaked out, grabbed a knife, and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into our neighbor's house. I never slept in that living room again.